Nana forgot my name on a Tuesday. She looked at me across the kitchen table with those steel-gray eyes, and for 7 seconds I was nobody to her. Then something clicked. She smiled, called me little bird. That was my mother's name for me, not hers. She'd never used it once in 31 years. The neurologist said the plaque deposits had reached her temporal lobe. Said we had maybe 18 months of coherent recall. He suggested we record everything. Her name was Elara Vasquez-Tan. 79 years old. 41 of those years spent piloting long-haul cargo freighters on the outer routes, the unglamorous runs between Sedna Station and the Kuiper processing platforms, between Neptune's orbital refineries and the deep belt depots where nobody went unless they were paid to. She'd hauled deuterium, ice cores, machine parts, once a shipment of 17,000 live chickens. She never complained. She said space was honest company. My brother Tamaz and I set up in her living room. 3 cameras, a directional mic, her favorite blanket. Nana sat in her rocking chair, the same one she'd bolted to the deck of every freighter she'd ever flown, and told us about her first launch. She was 22, vomited during ascent. The loadmaster laughed. She punched him. Got a written reprimand and a nickname that stuck for 4 decades, Iron Ellie. She grinned, telling it. The recordings went well for 3 weeks. She remembered routes, call signs, docking procedures. She described the sound a cargo bay makes when it decompresses in the cold, like a giant inhaling through clenched teeth. She remembered the exact color of Saturn's rings from the freight lane above Titan. Dirty gold, she said, like a wedding band that's been worn for 50 years. Then one afternoon, she stopped mid and asked where Kale was. There was no Kale, not in her family, not in any crew manifest Tamaz could find. He checked her pension records, her union files, every personnel log from every vessel she'd served on. No Kale. I asked her gently who Kale was. She looked at me like I'd asked the color of the sky. Kale is Kale, she said. I talked to Kale every night for 11 years. Then she asked for soup and changed the subject entirely. That night Tamaz pulled Nana's old storage drives from the attic. She'd kept everything: manifests, fuel logs, nav charts, maintenance reports. 41 years of data meticulously organized. But the personal logbook entries were the treasure. Audio files, thousands of them. Each one time-stamped, each one recorded from the cockpit of whatever ship she'd been flying. Her voice, younger, sharper, narrating the long silence between stars. We started listening from the beginning. The early entries were ordinary. Cargo weights, course corrections, complaints about the food processor. She talked about missing my mother, who was a toddler then. She sang sometimes old songs from Manila, where her grandmother was born. The entries were lonely but practical, a working woman accounting for her hours in the void. Then we reached the logs from her 9th year on the outer routes. Entry 3, 411. And everything changed. Something on the long range tonight, her voice said, younger by decades but unmistakably hers. Not a ship, not a signal, more like a pressure, like someone leaning on the other side of a wall. She paused. We heard her chair creak, ran diagnostics. Sensors are clean, probably nothing. Entry 3, 412, the next night it's back, closer, not threatening, just present like it's listening. Entry 3, 400, I said hello, and the pressure changed shape. Tamaz and I sat in stunned silence. We played the next 30 entries in sequence. Over the course of a month, Nana described a slow, cautious exchange with something she couldn't see, couldn't identify, couldn't explain. It communicated not in sound or light, but in what she called weight. A heaviness that shifted, that moved through the hull like tides. She said it felt like someone breathing in the next room. She never reported it. Why would I, she said when we asked her the next morning during a lucid window. They'd have grounded me, psychological evaluation. I'd have lost my route, my license, maybe my pension. She pulled her blanket tighter, and it wasn't hurting anything. It was just there, lonely maybe, like me. She looked out the window at the yard where my mother used to play. I decided to keep talking, so I did. Entry 3, 477, 6 weeks in. I think it understands me now, not the words, the feeling behind them. When I'm sad, the weight settles low. When I'm happy, it lifts. Last night I told it about Marisol's first steps, and the weight flickered like laughter, like surprise, like it had never heard of a child learning to walk. She paused. I'm calling it Kale. It needs a name. Everything that listens deserves one. We cross-referenced the dates with her shipping routes. During the period of the Kale entries, Nana had been running the longest, emptiest corridor in the outer system, the Heliopause Transit, a 14-month loop through interstellar space just beyond the sun's influence. Almost no traffic, no relay stations, no company. Just Nana, her cargo, and 2 billion kilometers of nothing, the perfect place to lose your mind or find something. Tamaz wanted to stop. He thought she'd hallucinated, isolation psychosis, madness. The clinical literature was full of it, solo pilots on the long routes hearing voices, seeing phantoms, developing elaborate imaginary companions. It was so common the Freight Pilots Union had a protocol for it. She was alone for over a year, he said. Her brain filled the silence. I understood his argument. but I kept listening to the logs. Because in entry 3602, Nana described her cargo hold depressurizing a microfracture in the hull, standard emergency. She sealed the compartment, rerouted life support. But then she said something that stopped my breath. Kale moved the fracture, she said it plainly. The breach was spreading toward the engine coupling, would have hit the reactor feed in 9 minutes, and then the crack just turned 90 degrees, propagated into an empty bulkhead instead. Metal doesn't do that. I pulled the maintenance report from that voyage, filed by the dock engineers when she returned to Sedna Station. It confirmed the hull fracture. It confirmed the anomalous propagation path. The crack had turned at a perfect right angle, something the metallurgist flagged as unprecedented but attributed to an unusual crystalline structure in the alloy. No further investigation. Just a note in a file nobody ever read again. Until now. I showed Tamaz the report. He stared at it for a long time. Coincidence, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. We kept listening, entry after entry, year after year. Nana talked to Kale about everything. Her marriage, her daughter, the taste of rain, the sound of traffic. She described oceans. She described forests. She described the feeling of holding a newborn. And each night the wait listened. Entry 4100, 3 years in. Kale asked me something today, but I felt the question, a kind of ache, shaped like curiosity. It wanted to know about grief. I'd been crying, anniversary of my father's death. And Kale leaned in, that's the only way I can describe it, and the pressure became specific, pointed. Like a finger touching a bruise very gently. It was asking, what is this? What does loss feel like? So I told it, her voice continued. I said grief is love with nowhere to go, and the weight changed. It became heavy, not oppressive, sacred. Like Kale was trying to hold the feeling for me, carrying part of it. I don't think it understood death before. I don't think death exists where Kale comes from. But it understood the weight of absence. It pressed against the hull all night. I slept better than I had in months. Nana made 7 heliopause runs over 11 years. Each one lasted 12 to 14 months. Between runs, she spent 3 to 5 months on station or ground side. During those gaps, there were no Kale entries, no references, no anomalies. But every time she returned to the deep transit corridor, within 72 hours, the pressure returned. Kale was waiting, every single time, as if it knew her schedule, as if it watched for her. I brought the discovery to Dr. Yunasato, a friend from university who now worked at the Interstellar Medium Research Institute. She specialized in heliospheric physics, the boundary layer where our sun's influence ends and true interstellar space begins. I played her 6 entries and showed her the metallurgical report. She listened without expression. When I finished, she was quiet for 40 seconds. Then she said, I need to see all of it. Yuna spent 11 days with the logs. She cross-referenced every Kale entry with sensor data from heliospheric monitoring stations along Nana's route. On the 3rd day, she called me at 2 in the morning. There's a density anomaly, she said, in the interstellar medium, right along her transit corridor. It appears and disappears. It's been flagged in 17 separate monitoring reports over 20 years, always classified as instrument error. Her voice was shaking. It moves. The anomaly was subtle, a localized increase in particle density, barely above the noise floor. It occupied a volume roughly the size of a small moon. It had no electromagnetic signature, no thermal output, no gravitational distortion. By every standard metric, it wasn't there. But the density shifts correlated precisely with Nana's Kale entries. When she recorded the weight growing closer, the anomaly tightened. When she described it receding, the density dispersed. 17 correlations, 0 exceptions. Yuna published a preliminary paper. It was ignored, then it was ridiculed. A cargo pilot's personal diary was not a data source. The correlations were called cherry-picked. One prominent astrophysicist wrote a 3-page dismissal calling the whole thing grief-induced pareidolia projected on a statistical noise. Yuna received a formal review from her institute. They suggested she distance herself from the work. She refused. She asked me for more logs. I gave her everything. Meanwhile, Nana was declining. Some mornings she recognized us. Some mornings she didn't. But Kale she never forgot. Even on her worst days, she spoke about the weight in the dark. She'd sit in her rocking chair and murmur, half to us, half to the air. Kale would understand this. Kale knows about forgetting. The universe forgets things all the time. Stars forget how to burn. But Kale remembers, always remembers. Entry 5987, year 8, the one that broke me. Kale showed me something tonight, not with weight, with temperature. The cockpit warmed just 2 degrees, and I know this sounds impossible. I felt a landscape, not saw, felt. Vast, dark, not empty, dark, full dark. A place where everything touches everything else. No edges, no distance, just presence. She paused. Her voice softened. Kale showed me home, and it was beautiful. Yuna found something else in the heliospheric data. The density anomaly wasn't random. Over 23 years, it had slowly migrated, drifting inward along the same transit corridor, edging closer to the solar system's boundary. The drift was imperceptible on human timescales, But when she mapped it, the trajectory was unmistakable. The anomaly was following, not Nana's route, Nana herself. When she retired and stopped flying, the drift stopped. It waited at the boundary, still there. Tamaz finally broke, not from skepticism, from guilt. She tried to tell us, he said one night, holding a mug he'd forgotten to drink from. She mentioned the wait, years ago, at family dinner. I thought she was being poetic. I laughed. He set the mug down. She spent 11 years having the most important conversation in human history, and she did it alone because nobody in her own family would have believed her. The last Kale entry was number 6739. Nana's final run, her retirement voyage. Her voice was older, rougher. Last night, Kale, she said. I told you that at the beginning. I can feel you understand. A long silence, chair creaking. I don't know if you'll still be here when there's no one to talk to. I don't know if you were here before me. But I want you to know you were the best listener I ever met. She continued, I'm going to go home now, to my daughter, my grandchildren. I'm going to sit in a garden and feel rain and remember what gravity feels like when you're not fighting it. Her voice cracked. I wish I could take you with me. I wish you could feel rain. I described it so many times. The weight of water on skin. You always leaned in for that one. I think you almost understood. Entry 6739 ended with 14 seconds of silence. Then, barely audible, Nana whispered. The weight just pressed against my hand, right against my palm, warm, specific, like fingers. Another pause. When she spoke again, she was crying. I think that was goodbye. I think Kale just said goodbye with a shape it learned from me. The audio file ended. There were no more entries. She docked at Sedna 3 days later and never flew again. Yuna's second paper was different. She didn't argue for alien contact. She presented the heliospheric density data alone, 23 years of anomalous readings, the migration pattern, the correlations with transit schedules. She let the numbers speak. 3 independent teams attempted replication. 2 confirmed the density anomaly. The third detected something additional, a faint, rhythmic oscillation in the anomaly structure. A pulse, approximately 0.8 hertz. The same frequency as a resting human heartbeat. The discovery detonated quietly across the scientific community. Not with headlines, with whispered conversations in hallways, with late-night messages between researchers who didn't want to be the first to say it out loud. Something lived at the edge of our solar system. Something that had no mass, no energy signature, no physical form as we understood it. Something that had spent 11 years learning about rain and grief. The weight of a newborn from a cargo pilot named Elara. The authorities wanted to send a probe. A military vessel, an ambassador. Yuna argued against all of it. You're thinking about this wrong, she told the committee. This entity chose a cargo pilot, not a scientist, not a diplomat, not a warship. A woman alone in the dark who was willing to say hello. The committee overruled her. They sent a research vessel, the Leth, packed with instruments and a crew of 14. It reached the boundary in 9 months. The Leth sat at the heliopause for 47 days. Every instrument running, every frequency monitored, every sensor calibrated to detect the density anomaly. They found it exactly where Yuna predicted, but it didn't move, didn't pulse, didn't respond to any signal, any transmission, any attempt at communication. The anomaly just sat there inert like a held breath. The crew tried everything. Mathematics, music, binary, gravitational pulses, nothing. Kale was silent. On the 48th day, a junior analyst named Petra Okonkwo did something unauthorized. She turned off her instruments. She turned off her lights. She sat alone in the observation pod in the dark and she started talking, not transmitting, just talking about her mother's cooking, about her daughter's first day of school, about being afraid of the dark as a child, about how space made her feel small in a way that was almost holy. 6 hours later, the pod's ambient temperature rose by 2 degrees. Petra's report was classified immediately. Not because it was dangerous, because it was destabilizing. The implications shattered every framework. Kale didn't respond to science. It responded to vulnerability, to loneliness offered openly, to the unguarded voice of someone speaking into the dark without anything back. Nana hadn't discovered an alien. She discovered that the universe listens, but only when you're not performing. Only when you mean it. I played Nana the recordings of Petra's experience. It was a bad day. She didn't know my name, didn't know the house. But when she heard the description of the weight returning, the warmth in the observation pod, she went still. Her eyes focused with a clarity I hadn't seen in months. Kale found someone new, she said softly. She smiled. It was the purest expression of relief I have ever witnessed on a human face. Good. Kale shouldn't be alone. Nana died on a Thursday in November. Quiet, in her rocking chair, the blanket over her knees. Tamaz was holding one hand, I was holding the other. She hadn't spoken in 3 days, but her last lucid words, recorded by the camera we never turned off, were these: the weight is here. She said it with such peace, such absolute calm. And for a moment, I will never be able to prove this, the room felt warmer. Just 2 degrees. Yuna called the next morning. The heliospheric monitoring stations had recorded something unprecedented overnight. The density anomaly at the boundary, the one that had been stationary since Nana's retirement, had moved. For the first time in 15 years, it drifted, not outward toward deep space. Inward, toward Earth, it traveled 2 million kilometers in 11 hours, then stopped. Then slowly, over the following week, it dispersed, dissolved. Like a breath finally released, we buried Nana in the garden she loved. Rain fell, the first rain in weeks, and Tamaz laughed because of course it did. I stood there in the wet grass thinking about a cargo pilot who spent 11 years whispering into the dark, who taught an incomprehensible being about rain and loss.